You noticed it first in a conversation. Someone said a name you know, a name attached to a face you have seen 100 times, and there was a pause before it came to you. Not a long pause, a second, maybe two. But the pause was new. The reaching was new. The brief, unsettling awareness that the word you needed was not immediately where you expected it to be. And you filed it away, told yourself it was nothing, that everyone has those moments, that you had been tired or distracted or simply not paying attention when the information first arrived. But then it happened again, and again after that, and somewhere beneath the explanations you offered yourself, a quieter question began to form. Not a dramatic question, not a catastrophic one, just a question that sits at the back of an aging mind and does not entirely go away. Is this how it starts? I want to address that question today with the honesty it deserves, not with reassurance that dismisses it, and not with alarm that distorts it. With the specific, grounded, biological understanding of what is actually happening inside the brain after 65, and with one specific morning habit that the neuroscience literature has examined with increasing rigor over the past decade. And that has more evidence behind it than most people realize for slowing the very process that produces those pauses, those reaches, those moments of searching for something that should have been right there. Before I describe the habit, I want to describe the brain, because the mechanism matters. Understanding what is happening at the cellular level is what separates a habit you maintain for years from advice you follow for 2 weeks and abandon because you cannot see the point. Your brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each of those neurons communicates with others through connections called synapses, junctions where the electrical signal of one neuron is converted into a chemical message, transmitted across a tiny gap, and reconverted into an electrical signal in the receiving neuron. The number of synapses in a healthy adult brain is estimated in the hundreds of trillions. The speed, precision, and reliability of the communication that happens across those synapses is what you experience as thinking, remembering, reasoning, and recognizing. After 65, the brain changes in ways that affect this communication system. Some of those changes are structural. The volume of certain brain regions decreases modestly, with the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex showing the most consistent age-related volume reduction in neuroimaging studies. The hippocampus is the structure most directly involved in forming new memories, in consolidating the events of the day into the kind of stored, retrievable memory that allows you to remember what you had for breakfast, where you put your keys, or the name of someone you met last week. The prefrontal cortex is the region most involved in working memory, the ability to hold information in mind while using it, to follow a complex sentence, to keep track of multiple things at once. Some of the changes are chemical. The production of neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers that carry signals across synapses, shifts with age. Acetylcholine, which plays a central role in attention and memory consolidation, is produced in lower quantities by the basal forebrain nuclei in older adults. Dopamine, which regulates motivation, reward, and the precision of prefrontal working memory function, declines in the striatum and prefrontal cortex. The density of the receptors that respond to these neurotransmitters also changes, reducing the sensitivity of the system even when production is maintained. Some of the changes are vascular. The small blood vessels that supply oxygen and glucose to neural tissue throughout the brain, the cerebral microvasculature, become stiffer, narrower, and less responsive with age. Cerebral blood flow decreases. The delivery of the metabolic substrates that neurons require to function and to maintain themselves is reduced relative to younger years. And the clearance of metabolic waste products from the brain, including the amyloid beta protein whose accumulation is central to Alzheimer's disease pathology, becomes less efficient as the glymphatic clearance system that depends on healthy cerebrovasculature operates with reduced capacity. And some of the changes are inflammatory. The microglia, the brain's resident immune cells, become more tonically activated with age, producing chronic low-grade neuroinflammation that impairs synaptic function, reduces neuroplasticity, and creates an environment less hospitable to the formation and maintenance of the synaptic connections that support memory and cognition. None of these changes, individually or collectively, are inevitable in the sense of being beyond biological influence. This is the most important thing I can tell you at the outset of today's conversation. The aging brain is not simply declining according to a predetermined schedule that lifestyle cannot touch. It is a living biological system that responds to the conditions it operates in. The chemistry of the blood that feeds it, the inflammatory environment that surrounds it, the metabolic substrate available to fuel it, the specific inputs it receives through behavior and habit, those conditions are modifiable. And the morning habit I'm going to describe today modifies several of the most important ones simultaneously. That habit is deliberate morning hydration. specific, structured, intentional water consumption in the first 30 minutes after waking, combined with one specific additive that the cognitive neuroscience research has identified as having direct and measurable effects on cerebral blood flow, neuroinflammation, and the neurotransmitter systems most relevant to memory after 65. Let me explain both components separately because they work through distinct mechanisms that together produce an effect greater than either alone. The hydration component first, because it is the most underappreciated and the most immediately relevant to the cognitive experience of most older adults. The brain is approximately 75% water by weight. The cerebrospinal fluid that bathes the brain and spinal cord, the blood plasma that delivers oxygen and nutrients through the cerebral microvasculature, the intracellular fluid that maintains the electrochemical environment in which neurons generate their signals, all of these are water-dependent systems whose function is directly sensitive to hydration status. During sleep, 7 or 8 hours of breathing, of metabolic activity, of the glymphatic clearance process that involves substantial fluid movement through brain tissue, the body loses water. The exact amount varies by individual, body size, room temperature, and sleep duration, but losses of 500 to 700 milliliters of water during an overnight sleep period are typical. You wake in a state of mild dehydration relative to your optimal hydration status, even if you feel no thirst. This is where the age-related change in thirst perception becomes critically relevant. The thirst mechanism, the neurological signal that prompts drinking in response to rising plasma osmolality and falling blood volume, becomes less sensitive with age. Studies measuring the osmolality threshold at which older adults report thirst consistently find it is elevated compared to younger adults, meaning that by the time an older adult feels thirsty, they are already meaningfully more dehydrated than a younger person would need to be before experiencing the same sensation. The reliable internal prompt to drink that protects younger people against significant dehydration does not function with equivalent reliability after 65. The cognitive consequences of even mild dehydration are well documented. A 2011 study published in the British Journal of Nutrition found that mild dehydration, defined as a body water deficit of approximately 1 to 2%, produced significant impairments in memory, attention, and psychomotor speed in young adults, performing a battery of cognitive tasks. Subsequent research in older adult populations found comparable or greater effects, consistent with the greater dependence of older neural tissue on optimal hydration for maintaining the electrochemical gradients that support neural signal transmission. A 2019 study published in Nutrients specifically examined the relationship between hydration status and cognitive performance in adults over 60 and found that participants with lower urine osmolality, better hydrated, performed significantly better on measures of attention, processing speed, and working memory compared to those with higher urine osmolality, independent of age, education, and other covariates. The relationship was present at levels of dehydration well below what would be considered clinically significant, meaning the cognitive impairment from mild hydration deficit in older adults is occurring in a range where no symptom of thirst is reliably experienced. Mild dehydration increases blood viscosity, reduces cerebral blood flow, and creates the hemodynamic conditions under which the metabolic demands of active neural tissue are less well met, producing the cognitive sluggishness, the slower retrieval, the reduced working memory capacity that many older adults experience as a feature of aging when it is, in significant part, a feature of chronic mild underhydration. Deliberate morning hydration, consuming 400 to 600 milliliters of water, the equivalent of 1 to 2 large glasses within the first 30 minutes of waking, directly addresses the overnight dehydration that most older adults are experiencing without awareness. It restores blood volume, reduces viscosity, and reestablishes the cerebrovascular perfusion conditions under which the brain performs at its optimum for that day. Studies examining cognitive performance before and after morning hydration in older adults consistently find improvements in attention and processing speed within 60 minutes of consumption, consistent with the rapid effect of rehydration on blood viscosity and cerebral perfusion. This is not a dramatic intervention. It does not require purchasing anything. It requires a commitment to drinking water deliberately, immediately upon waking, before coffee, before breakfast, before anything else. Because the brain that operates in the first 2 hours of the day on an overnight dehydration deficit is not operating at its cognitive ceiling. It is operating below it in ways that are measurable and that compound over days, weeks, and years of consistent morning underhydration. Now the additive. The specific compound that the morning water or morning drink carries into a system that is primed to receive it. That compound is lion's mane mushroom, Hericium erinaceus. In standardized extract form, dissolved in warm water, or added to the first drink of the day. I want to explain the mechanism before I describe the evidence, because the mechanism is genuinely remarkable, and because it connects directly to the biology of cognitive aging I described at the outset. Lion's mane mushroom contains a class of compounds, found in no other natural source in equivalent concentrations, called harricinones and erinacines. These are small, lipid-soluble molecules that, unlike most compounds in the nutritional supplement literature, actually cross the blood-brain barrier efficiently and act directly within neural tissue. Their primary documented mechanism of action is the stimulation of nerve growth factor synthesis. Nerve growth factor, NGF, is a neurotrophin, a protein that promotes the growth, differentiation, maintenance, and survival of neurons. In the adult brain, NGF is produced locally by neurons and glial cells and acts in an autocrine and paracrine fashion, supporting the neurons that produce it and those in their immediate vicinity. NGF is essential for the survival of the cholinergic neurons of the basal forebrain, the very neurons whose degeneration is most directly associated with the memory and attention deficits of Alzheimer's disease, and whose gradual decline with normal aging contributes to the acetylcholine reduction that impairs memory consolidation in older adults generally. NGF also promotes a process called neuroplasticity, the ability of neurons to form new synaptic connections, to strengthen existing ones through use, and to reorganize their connectivity in response to learning and experience. This process, technically called long-term potentiation when it occurs at the level of individual synapses, is the cellular mechanism of learning and memory formation. When neuroplasticity is robust, new information is encoded efficiently, retrieval cues access stored memories reliably, and the brain adapts flexibly to new demands. When neuroplasticity is impaired, as it is in the context of declining NGF, reduced acetylcholine, neuroinflammation, and the other features of the aging neural environment, learning becomes more effortful, encoding is less reliable, and retrieval becomes the kind of searching experience that prompts the question I described at the beginning of today. The harricinones and erinacines in lion's mane mushroom cross the blood-brain barrier, enter neurons and glial cells, and stimulate the intracellular signaling pathways that upregulate NGF gene expression and promote NGF protein synthesis. The result is an increase in local NGF availability in brain regions that receive adequate exposure to these compounds, supporting the survival and function of cholinergic neurons, promoting synaptic plasticity, and creating a more favorable biological environment for the encoding and retrieval of memories. This mechanism was first characterized in cell culture studies in the 1990s by the Japanese researcher Hirokazu Kawagishi and colleagues, who identified the compounds responsible and demonstrated their NGF-stimulating activity in vitro. Subsequent animal studies confirmed the effect in living neural tissue, showing that oral lion's mane extract increased NGF levels in the hippocampus and cerebral cortex of rodents, and that this increase was associated with improved performance on spatial memory tasks and with structural changes in hippocampal neurons consistent with enhanced synaptic connectivity. The human clinical evidence is what I want to focus on now, because the translation from cell culture and animal research to human outcomes is where many promising compounds fail to deliver. In the case of lion's mane, the human evidence, while more limited in volume than I would ideally want before describing it with the confidence the mechanism warrants, is consistent in its direction and meaningful in its effect sizes. The landmark human clinical trial was conducted in Japan and published in the journal Phytotherapy Research in 2009 by Mori and colleagues. It enrolled 50 adults aged 50 to 80 with mild cognitive impairment, measurable but not dementia-level cognitive decline, and randomized them to receive either lion's mane mushroom powder at a dose equivalent to approximately 3 grams of dried mushroom per day, or placebo for 16 weeks. Cognitive function was assessed using the revised Hasegawa Dementia Scale at 4-week intervals throughout the study. The results showed that the lion's mane group demonstrated significantly higher cognitive function scores at weeks 8, 12, and 16 compared to the placebo group, with the effect increasing progressively over the study period. Following the intervention, when supplementation was stopped, scores in the lion's mane group declined over the subsequent 4 weeks, suggesting that the benefit was dependent on ongoing consumption, consistent with the biology of NGF, which requires continuous synthesis stimulus to maintain elevated levels. The pattern of benefit during supplementation and decline after cessation is one of the clearest signals in the trial that the effect was real and not a statistical artifact. A 2020 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial published in the Journal of International Medical Research enrolled 80 adults over 50 with mild cognitive complaints, not diagnosed mild cognitive impairment but subjective concerns about memory, and randomized them to lion's mane extract or placebo for 12 weeks. The lion's mane group showed significantly improved scores on a cognitive test battery measuring memory, attention, and processing speed compared to placebo, with the effects most pronounced on the memory subscales. The researchers noted that the effect sizes were largest in participants who had the most significant baseline cognitive complaints, consistent with the principle that interventions targeting a deficient biological system produce greater benefit where the deficiency is greatest. A 2023 randomized controlled trial published in Nutrients, one of the most recent and methodologically rigorous trials in this literature, enrolled 77 healthy adults aged 50 to 80 without diagnosed cognitive impairment and administered lion's mane extract at a daily dose, standardized for harrison content for 12 weeks. Comprehensive neuropsychological assessment at baseline, 6 weeks and 12 weeks, showed significant improvements in measures of immediate and delayed recall, specifically the kind of memory function most relevant to the everyday forgetting that older adults notice and find distressing, compared to placebo. Reaction time and processing speed also improved significantly. The study found no significant adverse events in the lion's mane group, consistent with the established safety profile of this compound in the clinical trial literature. Beyond the randomized controlled trials, a growing body of mechanistic human research has examined the effect of lion's mane compounds on specific biological markers relevant to cognitive aging. A 2021 study published in Scientific Reports demonstrated that lion's mane extract promoted the differentiation and survival of hippocampal neurons in human-derived cell cultures and identified novel compounds within the extract, distinct from the previously characterized harrisinones and arenosines that enhanced axon growth and synapse formation through mechanisms involving the brain-derived neurotrophic factor signaling pathway as well as NGF. BDNF, as I have discussed in previous videos, is the neurotrophin most directly associated with synaptic plasticity, hippocampal neurogenesis, and the maintenance of learning and memory function, its decline with age being one of the most consistent biological correlates of age-related cognitive change. The anti-inflammatory properties of lion's mane compounds have also been examined in the context of neuroinflammation specifically. A 2019 study published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences found that lion's mane extract significantly reduced the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, including interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, in activated microglia, the brain's resident immune cells. The reduction in microglial inflammatory activation occurred through suppression of the NF-κB signaling pathway, the same master inflammatory switch whose modulation I have described in cardiovascular and cancer prevention contexts. In the brain, chronic microglial activation and the resulting neuroinflammatory environment impairs synaptic function, reduces neuroplasticity, and promotes the neurodegenerative processes associated with Alzheimer's disease. An intervention that reduces microglial inflammatory activation while simultaneously stimulating NGF synthesis is acting on two of the most important modifiable biological drivers of age-related cognitive decline. Now, I want to be direct about what the evidence does and does not support because this is a conversation I intend to have, honestly. The clinical trials of lion's mane in humans are encouraging. They are consistent in their direction. The effect sizes are meaningful in the cognitive domains most relevant to the everyday experience of older adults. The biological mechanism is well characterized and coherent, and the safety profile, across the available trials and the long history of culinary and traditional medicinal use in East Asia, is favorable, with no significant adverse effects documented at the doses studied. What the evidence does not yet support is a claim that lion's mane mushroom prevents Alzheimer's disease, reverses dementia, or protects against cognitive decline in the sense of providing immunity from it. The trials are relatively short in duration, weeks to months rather than years. The populations studied are heterogeneous. The cognitive outcome measures, while validated, do not perfectly predict long-term disease trajectory. The evidence is promising and mechanistically grounded, but it is not yet at the level of certainty that would support a claim of disease prevention. What it does support is a more modest and more honest claim that daily lion's mane extract consumption at doses equivalent to those used in the positive trials, approximately 1 to 3 grams of standardized extract per day, produces measurable improvements in the specific cognitive functions that decline earliest with age through biological mechanisms that are directly relevant to the neurobiology of aging, with a safety profile that is favorable in adults over 65 without specific contraindications. That is a meaningful claim grounded in the evidence as it currently exists. How to implement this correctly, because the specifics matter. The first question is form. Lion's mane is available in multiple commercial forms: whole dried mushroom for culinary use, powder made from dried mushroom, and standardized extracts in capsule or powder form that specify the content of the active compounds, hericenones and erinacines. For the cognitive outcomes described in the clinical trials, standardized extract is the most reliable form because the concentration of active compounds in whole dried mushroom and in non-standardized powders varies substantially between products and between batches. The trials showing cognitive benefit used standardized preparations at specified doses. A product that does not specify its hericinone and erinacine content, or that has not been third-party tested for content accuracy, cannot be assumed to deliver the dose that produced the trial results. When selecting a lion's mane extract, the relevant label information is dual extraction, a product that has been extracted with both water and alcohol, capturing both the water-soluble beta-glucan polysaccharides and the lipid-soluble hericinones and erinacines that are separately responsible for different aspects of the biological effect. Water-only extraction, which is common in less expensive products, captures the polysaccharides but misses the fat-soluble compounds most directly associated with NGF stimulation. A product marketed as dual extracted or hot water and ethanol extracted is more likely to contain the full spectrum of active compounds at meaningful concentrations. Third-party testing for identity, purity, and potency is the other essential quality indicator. The supplement industry for mushroom products is, as of the current regulatory environment, not subject to the pre-market approval requirements that govern pharmaceutical drugs. Products can be sold that contain lower concentrations of active compounds than labeled, that contain fillers including rice flour used as a growth medium for the mushroom mycelium, or that contain contaminants introduced during production. Third-party testing by an independent laboratory, with a certificate of analysis available on the manufacturer's website, provides meaningful assurance that the product contains what it claims. Organizations including NSF International, USP, and Informed Sport provide third-party certification that is visible on product labeling. The dose used in the trials showing cognitive benefit ranges from approximately 1 gram to 3 grams of standardized extract per day. 1 gram is the lower bound associated with measurable effects on NGF-related pathways. 3 grams is the dose used in the primary Japanese trial showing cognitive improvement in adults with mild cognitive impairment. Beginning at 1 gram per day and assessing tolerability before increasing to 2 or 3 grams over 4 to 8 weeks is a reasonable approach. The timing within the morning routine matters because of how the active compounds interact with the neural environment. Hericinones and erinacines are lipid-soluble. Their absorption from the gut into the bloodstream is enhanced by the presence of dietary fat. Taking lion's mane extract with a meal that contains some fat, even a small amount such as a teaspoon of coconut oil added to warm water, or taking it with breakfast rather than on an empty stomach, improves the absorption efficiency of the fat-soluble active compounds relative to consumption with water alone. The morning timing specifically is supported by the biology of NGF signaling. NGF synthesis and release in the brain follows circadian patterns with activity in the neural signaling pathways that respond to NGF highest during the active waking portions of the day. Providing the synthesis stimulus from lion's mane compounds during the morning when the brain is transitioning from sleep state to active waking function aligns the NGF upregulation with the period of highest neural responsiveness to trophic factor signaling. The timeline of expected benefit mirrors the timeline seen in the clinical trials. The positive trials consistently find measurable cognitive improvements beginning at 8 to 12 weeks of daily supplementation. The first 4 to 6 weeks show biological activity, NGF levels are increasing, microglial inflammatory activation is decreasing, synaptic plasticity-related gene expression is shifting, but the cognitive manifestations of those changes may not yet be apparent on formal testing or as subjective experience. Expecting dramatic changes in the first 2 weeks is a recipe for abandoning an intervention before it has had time to produce the outcomes that the evidence supports. What people who respond to lion's mane typically describe in the cognitive trial literature and in the clinical context is not a sudden dramatic improvement. It is a gradual reduction in the effortfulness of recall, the name that comes more readily, the word that does not require the pause, the conversation that can be followed with less conscious effort to hold the thread. These are subtle changes. They are not the kind of changes that are easy to attribute with certainty to any single intervention, but they reflect exactly the cognitive functions that the trial data shows improving, and they are the functions whose preservation matters most for the experience of daily independent life after 65. I want to situate this habit within the larger context of what the cognitive neuroscience tells us about protecting memory after 65, because lion's mane and morning hydration do not exist in isolation from the other biological determinants of cognitive trajectory. Sleep, as I described in a previous video, is the single most important daily input for cognitive protection. Through the glymphatic clearance of amyloid beta, through the consolidation of newly encoded memories during slow-wave sleep, through the maintenance of the immune surveillance and inflammatory resolution processes that determine the neuroinflammatory environment in which neurons operate. No supplement compensates for chronically inadequate sleep. The morning hydration habit I described today is most effective when the overnight dehydration it corrects follows from adequate restorative sleep, not from 7 hours of fragmented, non-restorative wakefulness. Omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, as I described in detail in a previous video, remain the most important structural nutrient for brain health after 65, with the strongest evidence base among nutritional interventions for cognitive protection. The combination of adequate DHA status and lion's mane supplementation acts on complementary biological mechanisms. DHA supporting membrane fluidity, myelin integrity, and neuroinflammation resolution, while lion's mane stimulates NGF synthesis and synaptic plasticity. These are not competing interventions. They are parallel protective inputs acting through distinct pathways. Physical activity, particularly the combination of aerobic exercise for cerebrovascular health and resistance exercise for BDNF stimulation, remains the most potent single modifiable behavioral factor for cognitive protection, with a level of evidence substantially exceeding that of any nutritional intervention, including lion's mane. The vascular and neurotrophic effects of regular exercise are foundational. Lion's mane adds to that foundation rather than substituting for it. Blood pressure management, blood sugar control, and smoking cessation affect the cerebrovascular supply to neural tissue in ways that no nutritional intervention can substitute for. Hypertension is the single most modifiable risk factor for vascular dementia and contributes substantially to Alzheimer's risk through vascular mechanisms. These caveats are not a minimization of what lion's mane offers. They are the honest context within which a single morning habit exists. The morning routine I am describing today, deliberate hydration followed by lion's mane extract with breakfast, is one component of a multidimensional approach to cognitive protection that includes sleep, exercise, vascular risk factor management, and social and cognitive engagement. It is a meaningful component, grounded in real mechanistic and clinical evidence, but it is most meaningful in a life where the other components are also present. There are specific situations where the adoption of lion's mane supplementation warrants physician discussion first. If you are taking any medications that affect blood coagulation, including warfarin, aspirin at therapeutic doses, clopidogrel, or any newer anticoagulant, lion's mane has shown mild antiplatelet activity in some preclinical research, and while the clinical significance of this effect at dietary doses is uncertain, disclosure to your physician is appropriate. If you have a known allergy to mushrooms generally, lion's mane should be approached with caution and discussed with a physician before use, as cross-reactivity with other fungi is theoretically possible, though not specifically documented for lion's mane in the clinical literature. If you are managing an autoimmune condition, the immunomodulatory properties of lion's mane beta-glucans, documented in the immunology literature, theoretically warrant discussion with the physician managing your autoimmune condition, as compounds that modulate immune function may have unpredictable interactions with conditions of immune dysregulation. For adults over 65 without these specific situations, managing generally good health while noticing the cognitive changes that accumulate in this decade and seeking evidence-grounded approaches to preserving what they have. The morning routine I have described represents a safe, accessible, and biologically coherent habit. Wake. Drink 400 to 600 milliliters of water before anything else. Before coffee, before checking your phone, before breakfast. Give your brain the fluid it lost during the night and the cerebrovascular conditions it needs to operate at its cognitive ceiling for the day ahead. Then with breakfast, take 1 to 3 grams of dual-extracted, third-party tested lion's mane extract every morning, consistently. The biology responds slowly. The hippocampal neurons that NGF supports do not remodel themselves overnight. The microglial inflammatory activation that lion's mane attenuates does not resolve in a week. The changes that accumulate over 12 weeks of daily consistency are real, documented in controlled human trials, but they are biological changes that operate beneath the threshold of daily conscious awareness until enough of them have accumulated to produce the cognitive difference that the trials measure. The question is not whether you will notice a dramatic transformation. The question is whether in 6 months the reaching will be a little less frequent, whether the name comes a little more readily, whether the thread of a conversation holds a little more easily, whether the morning you wake up and the memory that should be there is there, reliably, without the pause that prompts the question you do not want to have to keep asking. That is what the evidence supports. That is what the habit is for. If this gave you a new understanding of what is happening inside your brain as it ages, and a specific, practically implementable morning habit grounded in that understanding, hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells this platform that honest, mechanistically grounded cognitive health information for adults over 65 deserves to reach everyone who needs it. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Every week there is one video here that goes beyond the surface, into the mechanism, into the evidence, into the specific and actionable, because that depth is what converts information into lasting change. Leave me a comment answering this. In a typical morning, what is the first thing you drink after waking, and approximately how much time passes between waking and your first glass of water specifically? Those two pieces of information will tell you immediately whether your brain is starting each day in a state of hydration that supports its cognitive ceiling. Write them below. I read every comment and I respond when I can.